Hello everyone, Steven here. Thank you for joining me today for another Reef Chat. So today we are going to talk about a topic that seems to have a bit of controversy. Not controversy in a bad way, but controversy in a way that there are polar opinions on this. That is whether or not you should be feeding your coral, and subsequently what you should be feeding your coral if you are going to feed your coral. I'm just gonna clear the air once and for all that number one, yes, you absolutely should be feeding your coral. As to what to feed your coral, that is going to be a question that we will actually explore in a series long conversation. So right now you can see that there's a lot of stuff floating around my tank because I have just fed my coral. And in my series coming up, I will actually discuss 4 different types of food that I have experience with and currently going to experiment with. So first of all is the POLYP Lab by or Reef Roids by POLYP Lab. I've been feeding my coral using this for over a year now. I will tell you what I think about this food in the upcoming episode when I review it. And then I have just started experimenting the instant PLANKTON. This is by NYOS, it's a German company. And I will also share my thoughts on this in another episode. And I've only just started using it for about a week and a half, so it's not entirely conclusive, but I will at the very minimum tell you how I feel about the food and if there's any room for improvement. And then I have also acquired the Reef Energy Plus Coral Nutrition AB Plus. This is from Red Sea. That I feel like this must be a newer product because they have been very heavily marketing this product as of late. I'm gonna try it out, and again I will let everyone know what I think about this. And lastly, I am going to try the Reef CHILLI. Now I have not opened the Red Sea nor the Reef CHILLI yet, so I can't really share my experience with them yet. But you know, I intend to once I am finished with this, which I thought would last me a little bit longer, but it isn't. And I will start jumping into this too. So why do we need to feed corals?
Well, to best answer that question, I think we have to first recognize that there are 2 different types of corals that people keep in a home aquarium. First of the 2 is probably the more common ones are the corals that have a symbiotic relationship with the zooxanthellae. These are the algae that coral host within their tissue. Coral provide them housing and protection, and in return, this algae will provide coral energy. And the second type is a type that is just strictly feeders. These corals do not house zooxanthellae within their tissues. Instead, they use their polyps to catch whatever object or food that is available in the water column. So, you know, if we have to answer, do you need to feed corals? Then for the second type of coral that absolutely need to eat because there's no algae living within them to provide energy, so those you absolutely have to feed them. And then the argument comes to the first type, you know, if coral is already getting enough energy from the algae that lives inside them, why do we feed them? Well, if you think of it this way, the algae provide them energy, but the algae doesn't provide them with all the different nutrients and minerals that they need. A good comparison will be someone who only eats bread and butter every day. Not even butter, just bread. I mean, you know, that person will probably get enough energy from eating the bread alone, but there's no vitamin, there's no fiber, there's no protein in that bread. So in the long term, it's not sustainable. The person may survive, but it's definitely not going to be very healthy. And the same can apply to coral. If you just leave the coral on its own and allow them to just kind of survive strictly on what the algae provides them, they're not going to be very happy. I mean, they will survive, but for the most part, they will kind of just wither away slowly. And a lot of people will say, well, I never feed my coral, my corals. Well, that's probably because there is enough nutrients in your water for the coral to absorb. The time that you're not looking, in the nighttime, if you actually shine a flashlight to your tank, you can see your coral is actually reaching out a lot of its polyps, especially the large polyp corals. For example, your acans, your chalices, they have their tentacles out because they're trying to reach and grab whatever is in the water column. And a lot of them do feed in the night when the lights are out. If you do actually observe, they kind of puff up and then deflate over time. That's also another way how they absorb nutrients in the water, is when they puff up and then they will filter through and absorb whatever is in the water column, and then when they deflate, they just kind of let go of that water, and then the cycle goes all over again. So that activity actually also is energy costing. So if you do not feed your coral over time, your coral is not going to grow very efficiently, because it's going to take up a lot of energy just by doing this water filtration activity. Furthermore, a lot of the food that are designed for coral out there in the market, like the ones that I have just listed before, are also meant to feed inverts. So, for example, I have a Caribbean thorny oyster in my tank. I also have some little clams, some scallops, and there's starfish in there. There's just a lot of critters that outside of coral can also utilize the food feeding. So should you feed them? Yes, definitely. Now, what do you feed them? That is actually a very good question, because depends on the coral, you want to feed them slightly different food. A lot of the LPS coral, large polyp stony coral, you can actually visibly see the tentacles. You don't even have to zoom in. Those tentacles are able to grab pretty good sized chunk of food. So, for example, a lot of Lobophilia, Trichophilia, your elegant coral, acans, you can actually chop up shrimp, feed them mysis shrimp, they will gobble it up, and that is good enough. For a lot of the SPS, the small polyp corals, namely Aquaporus and Monoporus, their polyps are just way too small to capture any of those larger chunk of food. Those, then you will need specialized food for them to capture, digest, and process. And that's when some of those brands that I have mentioned in the beginning of the video will come in play. And we'll talk about how each of them affect your coral, how each of them will probably fit better for one coral than the other. So in conclusion, I want everybody to be aware of is that yes, you should definitely feed your coral food, but what you should feed them is going to differ a little bit, depends on what you have. Because aside from feeding them, you'll also be benefiting other invertebrates or even fish in the system that may be feeding on the same coral food that you feed. So there are some little tips and tricks that I will be sharing with you once I go through the product links. Once I show you how each of these 4 products that I've been using for. And sometimes your fish will go fight for food, sometimes the shrimp will dive in and grab the food away from coral. There are ways to counter that, and we'll all cover that. But I also want to hear from you guys. What have you been doing to feed your coral? What is your feeling about coral food? In your own experience, in your own words, please feel free to comment and share. Let us know, how do you feel about feeding coral, and what are your success or maybe some of the disadvantages that you have experienced. One last thing before closing out, most of the coral food that when I read the instruction tend to suggest heavier feeding than what I would recommend. Obviously different reefers have different opinions, but personally, whenever I feed them the food, the amount of food that they recommend in the frequency that they recommend, my tank tend to break out in the algae bloom, which means that's just way too much nutrient than the coral and the tank can handle. So I believe that they may be doing this because, commercial, they need to sell their stuff, their product. And again, feel free to comment if you feel that is a justified comment that I have, that don't ever feed your tank more food than definitely no more than what the instruction says, but I would caution to feed a lot less than what the instruction says. So let me hear your thoughts. I'm happy to hear from you. And once again, would love for your support to like, comment, share this video, and also to subscribe to my channel. Thank you everyone. I look forward to see you again.